The night everything fell apart, I was not even supposed to be home. That was the first twist. I had a work trip scheduled, 3 days out of town, back-to-back meetings, networking, the usual corporate routine. I had kissed my wife goodbye that morning, just like I always did. She had smiled at me, told me to have a safe flight, and went on with her day like nothing was wrong. Like she was not already making plans the second I walked out the door. I was already halfway to the airport when I got the email that changed everything. A freak storm had rolled in out of nowhere, grounding all outbound flights for at least 24 hours. At first, I was irritated, canceled plans, wasted time. But now, I thank whatever force in the universe made that storm happen. I turned the car around and headed home, thinking I would surprise her. Maybe we could go out for dinner, spend the evening together, reconnect. Stupid, right? I was still that guy, the fool who believed his wife would be happy to see him. I did not park in the driveway. I do not even know why. Just a strange impulse, maybe. Something in my gut telling me not to. Instead, I stopped a few houses down, killed the engine, and stepped out. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. And then, as I walked up to the house, I noticed something. The lights were off in the living room, but upstairs, our bedroom window glowed faintly. I frowned. That was odd. Emily never went to bed this early. I was still standing there, puzzled, when I heard it. Voices. My stomach twisted in a way I had never felt before. Not panic. Not yet. Just confusion. I froze on the porch, straining to listen. I could hear her. And then a man's voice. My pulse pounded against my ribs. I do not remember opening the door. I do not remember stepping inside. But suddenly, I was there, standing in the hallway, staring at our half-closed bedroom door. A rush of cold swept through me. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I did not. I pushed the door open. Emily was in bed, tangled in the sheets. And beside her, half naked, was him. Not some random stranger. Not some nameless mistake. No, it was Mark. Mark Foster Reynolds. My boss. My mentor. The man who had given me my first big opportunity, who had stood beside me at my wedding and shaken my hand, telling me I was a lucky man. And now here he was, in my bed, like he belonged there. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The world held its breath. Then, Emily's eyes went wide, and she scrambled to pull the sheet around her. "What are you doing here?" she blurted out. Not "I am sorry." Not "this is not what it looks like." Just "what are you doing here?" Mark sat up slower, rubbing his face like I was inconveniencing him. Like I was the problem. Like I was the intruder in my own goddamn house. And that is when something inside me snapped. I do not remember deciding to move, but suddenly, I was across the room. My fist connected with Mark's jaw before I even registered throwing the punch. The impact sent him tumbling off the bed, crashing into the nightstand. The lamp shattered. Emily screamed. Mark groaned, clutching his face. Jesus Christ, man. I grabbed him by the collar, yanking him up. Get the hell out of my house. My voice did not sound like my own. It was too steady, too calm for the storm raging inside me. Emily scrambled off the bed, the sheet wrapped around her like some pathetic shield. Stop it. Just stop. I ignored her, shoving Mark toward the door. He stumbled, dazed, his pants still tangled around his ankles. But then, he had the audacity, the sheer arrogance, to glare at me, like I was the one out of line. Listen, he muttered, wiping blood from his lip. Let's be adults about this. I did not let him finish. I shoved him harder, sending him staggering into the hallway. Emily grabbed my arm. Stop. Just listen to me. I turned on her so fast she flinched. Listen to what, Emily? My chest was heaving. My hands were shaking. I was seconds away from losing control completely. Do you actually have an explanation that makes this okay? Her mouth opened, then shut. Mark, the spineless coward, took that as his cue to run. He yanked up his pants and bolted down the hallway like a rat escaping a sinking ship. A few seconds later, the front door slammed shut. And then it was just us. Emily stood there, her hair a mess, her face pale. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Go ahead. Say it. Tell me it is not what it looks like. She hesitated. And then, in the most disgustingly casual voice, she said it. It did not mean anything. I saw red. I stared at her, my chest rising and falling like I had just run a marathon. My hands were still shaking, adrenaline still surging through my veins. It did not mean anything. That was what she said, like she had just knocked over a glass of water. like she had forgotten to take out the trash. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, well, that makes it fine then, right? I threw my hands up. No big deal. You just happened to trip and fall into my boss's lap. It was an accident. Happens all the time. Emily's face twisted in irritation, like I was the one being unreasonable. You do not understand. I took a step toward her, eyes locked on hers. Oh, I think I understand just fine. My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I walked into my bedroom and found my wife in bed with another man. What part am I misunderstanding? She actually rolled her eyes. Like this was annoying for her. Like I was being dramatic. And then she said the words that turned my blood to ice. You were not supposed to be home. I froze. My skin went cold. What the hell does that mean? I asked, my voice dangerously low. She crossed her arms over her chest, the sheet slipping slightly. It means this would not have happened if you had been on your trip like you were supposed to be. I took a step back, staring at her like I was seeing her for the first time. Are you actually blaming me for catching you cheating? She huffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. I am just saying, if you had not come back early, this would not be an issue. There it was. The moment I realized there was nothing left to salvage. That I was wasting my breath. That the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. If she had ever really existed at all. I exhaled slowly, the last shred of my patience slipping away. You are disgusting, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And we are done. Her eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? I turned away, already heading for the door. It means I am divorcing you. And for the first time that night, Emily panicked. Her arrogance shattered in an instant. Her expression flickered. Shock, fear, something desperate. Wait, what? She snapped, like she had not heard me right. I did not answer. I was already grabbing my suitcase from the closet, yanking open drawers, throwing my essentials into the bag. My movements were quick, precise, fueled by the kind of adrenaline that makes your hands work faster than your brain. Get out. Get out now. Emily rushed forward, grabbing my arm. No, you are not leaving. I turned to her, yanking free from her grip. You think you get a say in this? I let out a sharp laugh. You just got caught screwing my boss, Emily. You do not get to act like I owe you anything. She stepped in front of the door, blocking my way. You are overreacting, she hissed. It was one time. I stared at her, stunned at how effortlessly she could lie. One time, I echoed. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes darting just a fraction to the left, a tell. She was scrambling. Yeah, she said quickly. It was a mistake. I tilted my head, studying her. Then tell me something, I said, keeping my voice calm. If it was just once, why did you say I was not supposed to be home? Her entire face went stiff. Got you. I stepped forward, invading her space, watching her squirm. See, if it was just one time, you would have been shocked. Guilty. Something. But instead, the first thing you did was act like this was my fault for coming back early. I nodded slowly. Which means this is not new, is it? Emily swallowed hard. I repeated myself, sharper this time. How long? She shook her head. It does not matter how long. How long? Her eyes flickered with something ugly. Defiance. I knew the answer before she even spoke. 6 months. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was telling me what we were having for dinner. 6 months. I let out a breath, stepping back. I was not angry anymore. I was not even shocked. I was done. Emily saw it, felt it, and that was when the real panic kicked in. Wait, she said, grabbing my wrist again, this time tighter. Listen, we can fix this. I pulled free without hesitation. There is nothing to fix. Her face twisted. You are not leaving. I zipped up my bag. Watch me. And then, she did something I never expected. She slapped herself across the face, hard enough to leave a red mark. Then she screamed. The sound jolted through me like an electric shock. I stared at her, my brain scrambling to process what I had just seen. She clutched her cheek, breathing heavily, eyes glistening with crocodile tears. And then she looked at me. Like she was afraid. Like she was a victim. My blood turned to ice. Are you out of your damn mind? I whispered. She took a shaky breath. You. Her voice wavered, her hands trembling. Then, in a voice so quiet, so calculated, she said, You hit me. I froze. It took me half a second too long to understand. And in that half second, I realized exactly what she was doing. I stood there, my breath uneven, the room around me shifting like a bad dream I could not wake up from. Emily's words hung between us, heavy and suffocating. You hit me. It did not matter that it was a lie. It did not matter that I had never laid a finger on her. The accusation had already left her lips, and I knew what came next. I took a slow step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. Emily's breathing was ragged, her shoulders shaking as she clutched her cheek, eyes wide with fake terror. I could see it all playing out in her head, the narrative she was weaving. The betrayed wife, the violent husband. It was a story the world would believe. And I was the villain. My mouth felt dry, my body locked in place as I watched her. She was not crying, not yet. No, she was waiting, calculating, seeing if I would make a move, give her something to use. The moment stretched between us, silent but charged with something dark. Then she exhaled, shaky but intentional. And as if on cue, tears welled up in her eyes. The real performance was about to begin. I turned away, my hands curled into fists, not out of anger, but to keep them from shaking. I needed to think. Fast. She was going to call someone. The police, maybe. A friend. Someone who would hear the waver in her voice, the cracks between sobs, and believe every word she said. And once that happened, it would not matter that she was lying. It would be her word against mine. And I knew how that would end. I had to get out. Now, grabbing my bag, I moved toward the door, every muscle in my body tense, bracing for whatever came next. Emily did not try to stop me this time. She just stood there, trembling, watching, letting me go, because she had already won. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, she whispered, "You will regret this." I paused, the weight of those words pressing into my back. I did not turn around. I did not answer. I just walked out. Outside, the air was thick and heavy, a storm still lingering in the distance. I moved fast, not running, but close enough. My car was parked down the street, exactly where I had left it. The second I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripped the wheel tight enough to hurt. I needed to calm down, think, plan my next move. But my thoughts were scattered, flickering between past and present, between the reality I had known and the one I was just now understanding. Emily had not panicked when I caught her. She had not begged, had not pleaded for forgiveness, because she had never planned on getting caught. How long had this been going on? 6 months, she said. 6 months of lies, of sneaking around, of smiling in my face while betraying me behind my back. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was knowing that when the illusion cracked, when I saw her for who she really was, her first instinct was to destroy me. That was not a mistake. That was not regret. That was who she was. I closed my eyes, inhaling deep through my nose, exhaling slow. I could not stay here. If she called the police, if she spun the story the way I knew she would, I needed to be ahead of it. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over my contacts. Who do you call when your wife tries to ruin your life? Family? No, they would not understand. Friends? Most of them were mutual. They would take her side before I could even explain. Then I saw a name. Dan Mercer, my lawyer. It had not even been a thought until now, but the second I saw his name, I knew. This was bigger than just walking away. Emily was playing a long game, one I had not even realized I was part of. And if I did not start playing too, I was already dead in the water. I hit dial. It rang twice before he picked up. This better be important. His voice was gruff, tired. I had probably just woken him up. I swallowed hard. I need your help. A beat of silence. Then sharper, what happened? I gripped the wheel, forcing my voice to stay steady. Emily set me up. The words felt foreign in my mouth, surreal, like I was telling someone else's story. Dan did not ask me to explain. He just exhaled heavily. Where are you? I checked the clock. Nearly midnight. In my car. Not far from the house. Good. Do not go back inside. His voice was firm, commanding. Did she call the police yet? I do not know. You need to assume she will. I stared out the windshield, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. What do I do? Dan's answer came without hesitation. Get to my office. Now. I started the car, the engine humming to life. My hands were steadier now, my mind sharpening. There was no room for shock anymore. No room for betrayal or heartbreak. Emily had drawn the battle lines, and I was going to fight back. The road stretched out before me, dark and endless, headlights slicing through the night. My grip on the wheel was tight, my knuckles white. I had been driving for nearly 20 minutes, but my heart was still pounding like I had just run out of that house. Emily was setting me up, and I had no way of knowing how far she would take it. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting flashing red and blue lights to appear behind me. Maybe she had already made the call. Maybe police cars were on their way, ready to pull me over, ready to arrest me based on a lie. I had to be ahead of this. Dan's office was across town, a small firm tucked between a bank and a pharmacy. The parking lot was empty when I pulled in. I killed the engine, gripping the wheel for a second before forcing myself to move. My body felt heavy, my mind slow, like I was wading through water. I walked up to the door. Before I could knock, it opened. Dan stood there, dressed in sweats and a t-shirt, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion in them. He stepped aside, letting me in without a word. I barely made it through the doorway before everything caught up with me. The betrayal, the setup, the realization that my entire life had just been rewritten in the span of an hour. Dan shut the door behind me. Sit. I sank into the chair across from his desk, rubbing a hand over my face. My skin was clammy. I felt like I was still in shock, but there was no time for that. Dan sat down across from me, leaning forward. Tell me everything. I did. I told him about the trip, the storm, the decision to come home early. I told him about Mark, about the bedroom, the fight, the moment Emily turned everything upside down. And then I told him the worst part. The second she knew I was leaving, I said, voice hoarse, she hit herself. Dan didn't react. He just waited. And then she looked me in the eye. I whispered, my stomach twisting, and said that I hit her. Silence stretched between us. Dan finally exhaled, rubbing his jaw. You need to assume she is calling the police. I nodded, swallowing hard. Did you touch her? No, my voice was sharp, immediate. I barely even. I stopped myself, exhaling through my nose. I didn't lay a finger on her. Dan nodded slowly, tapping his fingers against the desk. He was thinking, calculating. If she files a report before we do, he said carefully, we are already playing defense. The system moves fast in cases like this. You are the husband. You are bigger, stronger. You are the one they will believe first. My jaw clenched. I knew he was right. Emily knew he was right. That was why she had done it. I could almost see it. The way she had been so calm, so in control. She had planned for this. Maybe not for me coming home early, maybe not for me catching her, but for this outcome. For the moment when I tried to walk away. She had prepared. And I hadn't. Dan was already moving, pulling his laptop closer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. We need to document everything. Now. I shifted forward. How? First, he said, not looking up, we get ahead of this. That means we go to the police before she does. My stomach twisted. You want me to go to the station? Yes, he said firmly. With a lawyer. You do not walk in alone. You tell them exactly what happened. Calmly, clearly. You say she is making false accusations. You say you left to avoid a fight. I nodded, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Dan kept typing. Second, do you have cameras? Security footage? I blinked. Security footage. My house had a smart home system. Cameras. Audio logs. I pulled out my phone so fast I nearly dropped it. My fingers fumbled as I logged into the system. The app opened, and there it was, a saved recording from earlier that night. Emily, standing in the living room. A phone pressed to her ear. I hit play. I don't care, she snapped, pacing. I'm saying he hit me. That's what they need to hear. I froze. The world seemed to narrow, my ears ringing. Dan's head snapped up. Play that again. I did. Emily's voice was sharp, her movements tight with frustration. It doesn't matter what really happened, Mark. If I tell them I was afraid for my life, they will believe me. I need you to back me up on this. Dan let out a slow breath, sitting back in his chair. His expression had changed. He was no longer just thinking. He was plotting. This, he said, pointing at my screen, is the only thing keeping you out of a cell. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the phone. Emily's voice kept echoing in my head. I need you to back me up on this. Mark. She had called Mark. Dan saw the shift in my expression. What? I turned the phone around, showing him the video. She's talking to Mark. Dan's eyes narrowed. You think he's in on it? I let out a bitter laugh. Do I think the guy who spent 6 months screwing my wife might be willing to lie for her? I shook my head. Yeah, I do. Dan nodded once. Then we need to get ahead of this. Now. I was already dialing the number. Mark picked up on the first ring. Jesus, man, he exhaled. You finally called. I did not speak. I did not give him the satisfaction of silence. I played the recording. Straight through. No interruptions. Mark stopped breathing. I could hear it. The shift. The second he realized that everything had just changed. When the recording ended, I spoke. My voice was steady. Cold. You have one chance, I said. Tell me everything you know. Mark's breath was uneven. And then, softly, he said, Man, you don't even know what she's capable of. The line went dead. And I realized something. I had no idea what I was up against. Mark's words hung in the dead air between us, pressing down on me like a weight I could not shake. Man, you don't even know what she's capable of. And then he hung up. I sat there, my phone still pressed to my ear, my breath shallow. He was scared. Not guilty. Scared. My pulse pounded as the thought lodged itself deep in my skull. Mark Reynolds, my boss, the guy who had been sleeping with my wife for 6 months, was scared of her. Not ashamed. Not regretful. Scared. Something was wrong. Dan must have seen the shift in my expression. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. What did he say? I set my phone down, running both hands through my hair. He said I don't know what she's capable of. Dan narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? I shook my head. I don't know. And that was the problem. For weeks, months, I had been thinking too small. I thought this was just about an affair. A betrayal. A woman willing to lie to cover her tracks. But what if it was more than that? What if Emily had been planning something from the start? What if I was not just a husband she had cheated on, but a target? My stomach twisted. My gut screamed at me that I was missing something. I turned back to my phone, pulling up the recording again. Emily's voice played through the speaker, sharp and commanding. It doesn't matter what really happened, Mark. If I tell them I was afraid for my life, they will believe me. And then, just beneath it, something I had not caught before. A single word. Mark had whispered it under his breath. But I had been too focused on Emily to hear it the first time. Now, I turned the volume up, playing it again, my ears straining. Emily, I need you to back me up on this. Mark, barely audible, Jesus, not again. My body locked up. Dan straightened in his chair. What the hell did he just say? I played it back. Slower this time. Mark's voice was quiet, but it was clear. Dan's eyes darkened. She has done this before. The words sent a chill through me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Mark was not the first guy she cheated with. That is not what I mean, Dan said, his voice low. I am saying, this is not the first time she has set someone up. The room felt colder. The air heavier. Something dark was settling over me. I had spent the last few hours trying to get ahead of Emily's lies. But now, for the first time, I was wondering, how many times has she done this before? Dan stood abruptly, grabbing his laptop. We need to check something. I watched as he pulled up public records. Divorce cases, restraining orders, accusations, lawsuits, anything attached to Emily's name. And then we found it. Buried 5 years back. A domestic violence claim. Filed by a man named Lucas Grayson. My blood ran cold. Dan clicked into it, scanning the report. Filed in October. She claimed he became abusive after she caught him cheating. Said he snapped one night, hit her, and she fled. I felt sick. Dan scrolled further. Filed a restraining order. One in court. Got the house. Bank accounts. A full settlement. I forced myself to breathe. Emily's last husband. A carbon copy of what she was trying to do to me. My mind raced. How had I never known? How had she hidden this? I had been married to her for years and never heard the name Lucas Grayson. Unless that was not his real name anymore. Dan was already ahead of me, typing fast. Searching. And then, there it was. A death notice. Lucas Grayson dead. 1 year after his divorce. Ruled a suicide. I shoved back from the desk, my pulse spiking. No, this is wrong. Dan's jaw was tight, his hands locked together. It is not wrong. I shot up from my chair, pacing. You're telling me she did this to another man? The exact same setup? And then what? He just conveniently kills himself. Dan exhaled. It is possible. No, it is not. My voice was rising, panic creeping into the edges. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. A goddamn script. Dan nodded slowly. And you are the next act. The words nearly knocked the air out of me. For the last 6 months, I had thought I was losing my wife. Now, I realized, I had never had her to begin with. Emily was not a woman who had an affair. She was not a liar who got caught. She was a predator. A planner. And I was in her crosshairs. I turned to Dan, my heart slamming against my ribs. We need to find Mark. Dan frowned. Why? Because he is next. Dan's expression darkened. If she thinks he might turn on her, then she will do to him what she did to Lucas. I finished, my stomach twisting. Dan grabbed his keys. Let's go. I was already out the door before he could catch up. Emily had set me up. She had done this before. And if we did not move fast, Mark Reynolds would be dead by morning. The city blurred past us as Dan drove, his hands tight on the wheel, his jaw locked in grim determination. The urgency in the air was suffocating. I kept my phone in my lap, staring at Mark's last message. We need to talk. Now. It had felt wrong when I first read it, but now, knowing what I knew, it was a cry for help. Mark had figured something out. Or maybe Emily had given him a taste of what was coming. Either way, we were already behind. I checked the time. Nearly 1 a.m. We were running out of it. Dan's voice cut through the silence. Where does Mark live? Midtown, I said quickly. Condo on Parkview. Dan nodded and pressed the gas harder. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. My mind was racing, flashing through every interaction I had ever had with Emily. Her smiles, her laugh, the way she used to look at me. Had it all been fake? Had I ever really known her? Or had she always been waiting for the moment she could flip the switch, turn me into her next victim? I gritted my teeth. Not this time. Not me. The second Dan pulled onto Mark Street, I spotted his building, a sleek, modern high-rise, dark except for a few scattered windows still lit. Dan parked illegally. I was already out the door before the car had fully stopped. We ran inside. The night concierge barely looked up as we passed. We did not wait for the elevator. No time. We sprinted up the stairs 2 at a time, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I reached Mark's door first. Banged on it. No answer. Dan stepped up beside me. Try again. I did. Harder. Nothing. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. Dan swore under his breath, glancing down the hall. No security cameras. No neighbors peeking out. No one to stop us. I gripped the handle and turned it. Unlocked. Dan and I exchanged a look. Then I pushed the door open. The scene. The apartment was dark. Too dark. The city lights outside barely cut through the space, but I could feel it, the wrongness in the air. A single lamp had been knocked over, the bulb flickering weakly on the carpet. Papers were scattered across the coffee table. A glass lay shattered near the kitchen counter. And then I saw it. The trail of red smudges leading down the hallway. Dan inhaled sharply beside me. Jesus Christ. We moved fast, following the crimson path into the bedroom. The door was ajar. And inside, Mark, sprawled across the bed, his shirt dark with blood. For a split second, I thought we were too late. That Emily had already finished what she started. That Mark Reynolds was just another suicide waiting to be recorded. Then, he groaned. I lunged forward. Mark. His eyelids flickered, his face pale, his breathing ragged. There was blood, a lot of it, but the wound was on his side, not fatal. Not yet. Dan was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling an ambulance. I pressed my hands down on Mark's injury, trying to stop the bleeding. Mark, look at me. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Then they snapped to me, and the fear in them was raw. His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. She was here. I tightened my grip on him. Where is she now? Mark shook his head, wincing. I don't know. I don't remember everything. His breaths were shallow, his words slow, like he was trying to fight through a fog. She came here, said she wanted to talk. A chill ran down my spine. That was the setup. The same way she had lured Lucas in. The same trap. Mark coughed, his body trembling. She gave me a drink. Dan and I locked eyes. Jesus Christ. I turned back to Mark. You think she drugged you? His hands twitched. I don't, his voice broke. I feel wrong. Heavy. I swore under my breath. Emily had tried to knock him out. Maybe to make it look like he overdosed. Maybe to finish the job while he was unconscious. But something had gone wrong. She had left before she could finish. Mark sucked in a sharp breath, his fingers gripping my wrist. She told me. I leaned closer. Told you what? His lips barely moved. You were supposed to die first. My stomach dropped. I pulled back, my skin crawling, my pulse hammering in my ears. Emily had not been setting up Mark. Not just him. She had planned to take me out first. She was supposed to destroy me, paint me as the villain, ruin my life, my reputation, and then finish me. But I had ruined the timeline. I had come home too soon. And that was the only reason I was standing here, alive, while Mark bled out on the bed. I grabbed my phone with blood-streaked fingers, scrolled through my messages. Nothing from Emily. She was gone. And that scared me more than anything. Dan spoke first, his voice low. She's going to come back. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. Yeah. Mark coughed again, his eyes fluttering closed. Don't let her win. Sirens wailed in the distance. Help was coming. But Emily was already gone. And if I knew her at all, she was not done. She was just getting started. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. The kind of place where time moved differently, where the weight of life and death settled into every breath. Mark was stable. At least, that was what the doctors said. They had pumped the drugs out of his system, stitched up the wound on his side. He would live. But none of this was over. Emily was still out there. And she wasn't the kind of woman to just disappear. Dan sat next to me in the waiting room, one leg bouncing, his jaw tight. He had barely said a word since we got here, and I knew why. We had made a mistake. We had assumed Emily was just trying to ruin me. But she had been playing a different game all along. She wasn't just going after my reputation, my finances, my life. She had wanted me gone. And I had been too blind to see it. I stood suddenly. I need to go home. Dan's eye snapped to me. No, you don't. I ignored him. My body was moving before my brain could catch up. My heart was pounding, my blood cold. There was something waiting for me at that house. Something I hadn't seen yet. Dan cursed, pushing himself up. For the love of God, don't do this. I was already heading for the exit. Listen to me, he snapped, grabbing my arm. She's setting you up. Again. You go back there, and she's already got the next move waiting. Just stay put. But that was the thing. This wasn't about reacting anymore. This was about ending it. I pulled free and walked out the door. Home. The drive was silent. Every turn, every red light felt heavier than it should have. I should have been afraid. I should have been second-guessing myself. But all I felt was clarity. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were steady. My pulse was slow. The house was dark. No sign of Emily. No sign of anything out of place. But I knew better than that. I stepped inside, the air still thick with the ghosts of the past 24 hours. My suitcase was still by the front door, half-packed. The hallway light flickered weakly. Then I saw it. On the coffee table. A single envelope. I swallowed hard, moving toward it, my body tense. My name was scrawled across the front in her handwriting. I opened it, and what I saw made my stomach drop. A printed email. From me. Except, I had never written it. I scanned the words, while rising in my throat. A confession. A fake confession. Emily had written it as if I had typed it myself. It read like a suicide note. Like a man overwhelmed with guilt, admitting to hurting his wife, to hurting Mark, to being unable to live with himself. My hands tightened around the paper, crumpling the edges. This was her final move. She had realized she had lost. She had tried to frame me. She had tried to turn Mark against me. And when that didn't work, she had decided to end it her way. She wanted me dead. And she wanted the world to believe I had done it myself. A floorboard creaked behind me. I froze. The house was supposed to be empty. Then I heard her voice. You were supposed to find that tomorrow. I turned slowly. Emily stood in the doorway to the kitchen, one hand resting lightly on the frame. She was calm. Too calm. Like she had already made peace with what was coming next. Like she had already won. I exhaled sharply. You were going to kill me. Her lips curled into something close to a smile. It would have been easier that way. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Emily was many things, a liar, a manipulator, a woman capable of playing the long game. But this was something else. She had never intended for me to walk away from this. She had never planned for me to live. She took a slow step forward, her eyes locked onto mine. You have always been so predictable. I clenched my jaw. That's funny. I was just thinking the same thing about you. Her expression flickered. A small, almost imperceptible shift. And then, I saw it. The knife. Tucked against her side, barely visible in the dim light. A heartbeat passed. Then another. And I realized this was it. Emily had backed herself into a corner. She had tried to destroy me with lies. She had tried to manipulate her way out. And now, when nothing else had worked, she was going to finish it with blood. She lunged. I reacted without thinking. I caught her wrist before the blade could reach me, twisting hard. She screamed, thrashing against me, but I was stronger. She had spent years underestimating me. I would not let her do it again. The knife clattered to the floor. Her breathing was ragged, her chest rising and falling in frantic bursts. She stared at me, her eyes wide with something that almost looked like shock. And then, the sirens. Loud. Close. She flinched. I didn't. I had called them on the way here. I had been ahead of her for the first time. Emily whipped her head toward the window, panic flickering across her face. The red and blue lights bounced against the walls, growing brighter, closer. She took a staggering step back. No, I didn't say anything. Didn't move. Didn't give her anything. I just watched. Watched as reality crashed into her. As she realized the story was over. As she understood that, for once in her life, she had lost. The front door burst open. Officers swarmed inside, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding. Emily collapsed to her knees. And then, just like that, it was over. It took months for everything to settle. Emily was charged with attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording, the fake suicide note, the history with Lucas. Mark recovered. He quit his job, moved out of state. I didn't blame him. As for me, I walked away. I didn't look back. Emily had spent years planning her next move. Years playing a game I never even knew I was a part of. But in the end, she had underestimated the one thing she couldn't control. Me.